Last episode, we 3D printed a new bumper for our car, or rather a new buck for a future composite bumper. And generally, everything is looking good. It's amazing to have this technology now, and we've got a lot more to do with it. But today, we need to head back out to the garage and fire up the grinder. Yeah. Just in case you thought we were close to finishing this thing, we've located a ton of complicated parts in a tiny space here, and that's great. But now that we have, we need to return to adding more structure, as while the chassis is all new, and we've even installed some tubular members in the cabin, they're not actually connected, and we need to solve that. It's going to be a process, so to help make things easier, check out what's just arrived.
That took us long enough.
Indeed. After 10 years using our trusty workmate, it's finally time for a fabrication table, and there are several reasons why. First, my back can't take this anymore. And second, this is metal, as I can tell you that welding and grinding on top of wood has its drawbacks. Lastly, these 216 holes are here so we can position clamps and spacers to hold parts firmly while we work on them, which should be a real nice feature. This is just a budget model, as I didn't feel like shelling out $1,000 or more right now, but regardless, the reason we never got one before was not the expense, it's that we have nowhere to put it. Honestly, this is a 2 by 3 foot table, and we're out of space. It's awkward enough to imagine working around this thing, but to just leave it in the open? No! What we need then is a storage solution, and for that, we must modify it. Our first step is to make it taller, which seems counterintuitive, I know, but trust me, it'll make sense. And as these stubby legs supplied with the table are not needed, we can repurpose them. There's really no rest for a new tool around here, and even during these first few cuts on the table, the increased surface area is already noticeable. So after cleaning up the edges of the parts for welding, we can flip things over and do the same to the main legs. Now to just melt the parts together. It's clear that I missed some areas of paint removal, but whatever. After grinding them back, they look totally fine, and even though there appear to be some gaps, that's just because the factory nut plates were welded from the inside, and I guess I just didn't run over everything on the outside. Still, they're not going anywhere. This extra height has brought the table up to a very comfortable level for me, but I understand if you're still confused as to how this solves our storage issues.
We were originally thinking that the legs should fold so we can just store it vertically down the side of my toolbox. But when you stop and actually think about the problem long enough, you realize that's not the solution. The real solution is make it bigger by raising it up a little bit further and slide it. It needs to go back a little further. We got a bunch of junk behind there that we need to clean out. But now we got a spot where you can still get to this tool chest. We even have some space on the top that we can still store some stuff if we need to. And it's accessible. Perfect.
Quite. This should be an absolutely massive improvement over Old Faithful, but we're still not quite done with it, as the steel framing needs to be removed every time we put it away, and being one piece is making things a bit awkward. The solution then? Chop up every factory weld on it to separate the parts. Now the sides can be installed semi-permanently, and you can see how that's helped eliminate flex in this direction. The front and back sections don't have the same hooks on them though, so we're going to make a couple of incisions and bend over the remaining tab. The extra material can get trimmed off next, and it just needs some cleaning up. Great! That very much gets the idea across.
Let's just see how close we are. Yeah, look at that. That's great. Probably keeping the sides lower is good for strength between leg to leg, so that grab the one, the other one moves. But now when we push it this way, that side moves too. The front will still be good for overall strength, but by leaning it out, our stool is now the perfect height. Like if I want a TIG weld, I'm just right here now.
And then we just have to pop out the back one and we can slide the whole unit on top of the storage, where the storage space for it.
Awesome. That means there's only one thing left to do. What the heck are you? No, not that! I meant we just need some caster wheels, you pyro. Jeez. See what I have to put up with? No, the workmate is safe and sound, but while dragging this 80-pound table around is not exactly tedious, the perfectionist in me says it could be much nicer. So I've hopped online and ordered up a set of some M10 lockable casters, which very conveniently are a direct bolt-on swap. Which is nice, and unlike my tool chest, these lock out the swivel and wheel together, so now we have an extremely portable, metal, tall, sturdy table that hopefully won't break my back and is even easier to access than the workmate. Perfect. The only thing even more perfect would be if you'd smash that subscribe button, as I can't help but notice that we're so close to hitting 50,000, and if you ask just a couple of friends to as well, we could even hit 100K by the end of the year. Hopefully you'll agree, that will be awesome. On to the main event though. We've already mentioned that we're adding more structure to the car, but let's quickly explain why. This ain't a unibody. It was, and still is, body on frame like a truck, meaning there's a standalone chassis that houses all the drivetrain components, and the sheet metal just kinda sits on top of it. It's old tech, but it works, and in a small shop, it was nice to isolate the two halves while we worked on them. Our new frame now runs underneath the floor to keep things straight, with both front and rear sections rising to bumper height for crash safety. And outriggers extend all the way to the pinch seams to give us hope in the event of a side pole impact. I've tried my best to make something that even Roadster Shop would be proud of, however there are some final touches to be made still. For starters, there's nothing tying these 2 points together, and they're supposed to be. That's what those tubes in the transmission tunnel are for, but without integrating them with the chassis, well, they're not doing anything. More tubing will frame this out then, and ultimately I'm aiming to create a safety cage of sorts that spreads forces throughout the entire car while surrounding the passenger compartment. We don't want a full-on roll cage as it's not a race car, though as far as I'm aware, even a half cage can't be used here for legal reasons. Regardless, there are still some ways to add strength, and it'll be easier just to show you. So to start, let's jack up the car.
Don't even need the extension.
Well, what do you know? Looks like our first issue of the day is going to be tire clearance. It's not that they hit at ride height, but with minimal bump, we're going to have contact, and that's no bueno. We knew this was coming, and the difficulty will be making clearance without sacrificing interior room necessary for the pedals. Hours of measuring says it should be doable, but there's only one way to be sure.
That was the bit you want me to remove, right? This bit, right? It wasn't something else. This was the bit that you wanted gone.
Yeah, just say yes. Yes. Well. There you go. Oh my
Hello.
goodness. What have we done now?
Well, if it wasn't ruined before.
Yeah. So, just when you thought we'd finished making holes in the car, it had to be done though. In place of the sheet metal, we're going to build a tubular structure that braces from the top 1x2 down to the frame here, which in due course will get completed with these parts we made previously. 1-inch box should work nicely, meeting up with the rest of our structure, while also being quite a bit easier to measure and cut angles on compared to round tube. This first piece is a really basic start, but the whole point is to recess the firewall and gain some tire clearance, which we've certainly accomplished when you consider where the old sheet metal ends. We'll come back later to trim it down like so, but there's lots to be done first.
First legitimate use for the new fab table, but this is the piece we just cut. This is it being flat on the top and bottom. And this is the next piece we're working on. And what I want is the front edge at the top and the base to be in the same spot from this piece to this piece, but I want this piece to come down 8 inches first, bend, and then cut back to the same point, so it'll look something more like that. So I don't know what that angle is, and obviously I don't know what angle we need to cut the back at just yet, but we can now at least measure down 8 inches and start to figure out the angle based on a tool and everything else we got here. So we'll figure that one out, And this is a really neat little way of being able to slide parts in up against some stops and keep them square and clamp them, so we can figure this out. I'm happy to have this addition.
Turns out the number we're looking for is 29 degrees, but that's the acute angle. Subtracting it from 180 gives us a resulting obtuse angle of 151 degrees then. Half of that will be our miters. It gets a little confusing sometimes when you've been adjusting and reading various numbers for hours, so as a test, some good old CAD templates easily confirm we're good to go.
So, if we've done this correctly, perfect. Look at that fitment there.
Perfect.
Tiny little gap, but that's fine for welding.
Ooh.
The way that this flat surface on the bottom here intersects this piece versus this piece means that this piece will actually be slightly longer through
Yes.
here than this piece.
Yep.
And of course, we've butted up the back side to the back side, not the front to the front. So technically, this piece is going to want to sit slightly in front of that, but I think we can wiggle things around just enough to make the fronts line up.
Generally speaking though, things are looking good, and I can't believe we've waited this long to get a fab table. Honestly, if you do this kind of work, just get one. So, with the other end trimmed down to size, we've now got both parts fitting properly, and we can see what they look like on the car. The sheet metal will require some bends to cover this, but it's entirely possible, and with the tire back on again, you can see the clearance we've gained. Sticking the lower section in place shows more of the overall concept, and while it hanging out proud of the firewall may look a bit odd, it is the same as the factory design. Gosh, must be way off on this. It's going out like that though, and I've quickly moved the inner tube over just a notch, as I'm thinking a third member will be important to support a subsequent feature we'll talk about shortly. Let's first see how this will impact our pedal clearance though. Looks like the central position falls directly in line with the clutch, and the brake will be in the same boat once a third tube is present. We have maintained more than our needed travel though, and the intersection of the bend and pedal is as perfect as could be. So I think we're good to make one more of these pieces and see it all together. While we had the fixture set up, we also threw together a set for the passenger side, as we're obviously going to need them eventually, and with the driver's trio back in the car, things are really progressing. We'll make sure to keep the vertical portion of the tubing vertical during welding, and as nothing protrudes forward of the 1x2 box, clearance to the wheel well has increased, so hood closure won't have been affected. In the long run, another tube is slated to come forward of this area like so, bolting to the body before also picking up the shock tower and ending at the frame with a second bolt-on solution. We'll call it our chassis support structure, and its connection at the firewall is what we're working towards right now. As visualized with a piece of welding rod, the position of the two inner 1x1s will be crucial. Ideally, we'd keep them as close together as possible for strength. However, I'd also like to run wires and hoses along the top of the support later, so we've got to leave some room for a bulkhead pass-through. The exact location of this new feature will affect how the wheel wells seal to it, but what I'm seeing so far is very workable, and thankfully the LS is just narrow enough to make this possible. Several other aspects that dictate where we could put this tube, though, are clearance for the upper control arms, clearance for our future heat shields, access to the spark plugs, and of course, room for some shocks. We've been waiting to purchase coilovers for a while now, and that's going to continue, as once the car is closer to its final weight, we'll scale it, somehow, then decide on our best options. I'm really pleased with how promising things are looking though, so after a bit more discussion and measuring, let's get back to work. Alrighty, that's looking good. The top two holes are for the wiring pass-throughs we mentioned earlier, and the lower one is where that front support structure will attach, complete with captive nuts for a 2-volt flange. We've ended up leaving a bit more space between this tube and the exhaust manifold to keep things cool, but no, the tire won't hit. We checked. It's fine. For the inside, things are looking just swell, and of course, by the time there's carpet and sound deadening, you won't even see any of it. But speaking of the interior, right behind this plate is where yet another tube will travel back to meet into the transmission tunnel, as demonstrated by this stunt double jack handle. As things would have it though, while we planned to attach it directly behind this area, that's going to interfere with the brake pedal. So instead, we must tackle this by hole sawing through the 1x1. There are two angles involved here. By tipping it on edge like this, we can drill straight through the corners to point towards the middle of the car. And the tilt here will then angle that cut upwards. Some eyeballing was necessary here, but we should be close. Center punching the hole a little higher than our target area makes sure the round tube will finish at the correct spot. And after pre-drilling it, we can head over to the drill press.
There it is. Yep, I just got it at the bottom.
We're either screwing up a perfectly good piece or this is going to work. Got a little bit of a wobble going on. Woo!
The way it's biting, it's going to be...
A little momento. The 7/8 inch hole saw is smaller than a 7/8 inch tube. Please hold.
No matter, we'll drill out the backside first and enlarge the diameters next.
One ruined 1x1. You know, you shouldn't turn it on until I've actually tested that it does definitely fit.
You'll get it through, but you'll never be able to get it apart.
It's very optimistic of you, you know?
You think you're done with filing, don't you?
I think we're good.
Oh, looky there.
There we go. So let's try that in the car and see if this end is pointing at all where we need it to be.
In the right direction.
Yeah. Obviously we need to chop this down to size a bit, but...
This is the idea. You can see the tube going through there.
We have clearance underneath to the steering shaft.
That's the
The
tube there.
throttle does not hit it. The brake coming down does also not hit it. We hit the 1x1, but it doesn't hit the tube. Plates that shape there very nicely, and then we just have to fish mouth that end so it can get welded right into the rest of the transmission tunnel.
Right. To do that then, we've wrapped the tube with some paper to eyeball a preliminary cut. And by sliding that off the end slightly to check the fit up, it looks like things are sitting well enough to proceed. The line gets transferred over then, and we can now use our new V-blocks to hold things steady while we get to work with the grinder. That gets the end of the tube processed to its final shape. And we left this lip, spaced a 1/4 inch back from the face, for a specific reason. It overhangs the main 1/8 inch plate here, with a gap for a second smaller plate to be stacked on top. This is to reinforce a locating dowel for the front chassis support structure, which you'll see more of in a bit. Thankfully, this new tube is fitting beautifully, and it would be a lie to say this was an easy task, so 3 cheers that it's worked out. Capturing depth is near impossible with a camera, but the clearances are all more than adequate, and nothing that moves comes anywhere close to hitting. Which goes for our feet too, as things are high enough to avoid any accidental kicks and subsequential blackened toes. Yay! The junction of this new tube lines up perfectly with the one already installed, and a mirrored piece on the passenger side will complete the design. Very glad to have some triangulation going on here, so let's carry on. That's not going anywhere, so it's time to start on the next leg. This one will tie all the parts made so far together and brace them back into the A-pillar, just like the 1x2 above it. Same as before then, some CAD templates confirm the angles, and we can press on with steel. That's a fine start, but now things get a bit tricky. So the intersection of the vertical member into this horizontal beam, which is going to go back into the A-pillar over here, is a little awkward because nothing's wanting to meet up nicely. A straightforward clean cut like that on the end is what we need to get it into the side, but there's a remainder that needs to be left into this area here. And as you can maybe tell, it needs to be long on the top, so you need to leave a little wedge up in here, and it needs to be short on the bottom, and so it still needs a little wedge, but you're basically going to have a piece that fills out like that, if you get the idea. So that's what we've drawn right over here. This part here should still be adequate to complete this whole piece when we've cut it properly, which is we're going to do an initial cut up the middle just to separate them. But then this one will get cut down on these lines here, leaving this corner. And then the exact opposite will happen on this side, where we're going to leave that corner there. So we're going to cut it in half. That gives us our two pieces. And then when you look down from the top there, you can see the square, and you can see this tapering down. And then obviously we have the opposite
on this side. So everything seems to be there. Everything seems to be working. Short of cutting it, we're not going to know.
Yeah, that's right. This is only taking an hour or so.
It's only taken all afternoon. Let's be honest. It's only taken like all afternoon to make this part and draw that.
Why would you make it that complicated? But
I don't know.
Here we are.
You know what? It didn't look that complicated when I was designing it in my head.
No, it didn't.
At this point, it's possible that round tube would have made things easier, but without a proper tube bender, that wasn't going to happen. And honestly, every tricky line here would have just been a tricky curve on a round tube, so potato, potato. Though for clarity, it's always potato.
Very slick.
Oh my goodness, that was enough work. And guess what? We still have one more little thing to do over here.
Yeah.
Because we still have to tee down into this area. Not down here, thankfully, but into this area. So we just have to figure out the length that this needs to get cut down then. And all of this should fit in the car. Cool.
My brain hurts a bit from this, though you can't argue with the results. And with it all back in the car once again, we seem to have been successful. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to skin with sheet metal, but I have some ideas, and honestly, I'm just so happy to have increased the tire clearance without really losing anything inside. And considering the dimensions of this car, that's a huge win. Magnets and tape are hardly installed though, so we better do something about that. Apparently, upon returning to the fixture table, that last piece didn't fit quite so well after all. So I've done some slicing and dicing, and I guess it'll work.
Well, doesn't fit as well as I wanted it to, but it should still be effective.
The size of the part is steadily growing, but thankfully we can just get it in here and everything still fits correctly. I'm just not really fussy with how that junction turned out. It was a lot of effort to get such a second-rate fitment, but maybe this is when I just have to call it good enough. It's not like it's ever going to be visible when we're done. I'll think about it. Next, we need a strip to connect all three vertical members together, bolt them into the chassis, and provide a corner that sheet metal can be welded to.
So you may have just seen this welded together, and
now it's not.
Now it's not, because I couldn't live with bending this end over and welding it up. It didn't look good, and maybe we should just remake this part altogether so you don't have the foibles left in the surface finish here, but this does get covered with sheet metal eventually, and it's not going to affect the strength one bit when we're done, so I think I can live with this. But I can't live with how we had it mounted before. It didn't meet up at the back. The front looked bad. It wasn't working for me. So what we're going to do is just sort of make it fit. And I think all we need to do there is take off a little bit of material from that angle and a little bit of material from this angle just to get it to slip in there and have the top meet up like it's supposed to. And then we can carry on again because this was how I wanted it to be.
And by the power of video editing, it's now fixed, and it wasn't even a big deal. So see, to heck with good enough, OCD is just better. Now everything can get tacked up for good. Except after checking it in the car once again, I decided the outer leg still needed more adjustment. A few select spots were cut then, so we could fixture it a different way, zap it together once more, and try it up for size yet again. Good. As Homebuilt by Jeff always says, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing twice. With that, we've got a very shiny setup that's fully welded and completely perfected. I know it just looks like a few bits of metal stuck together, because technically it is, but it's been a job and a half to design, so I hope you'll agree that at least it's finished up nicely. For interest's sake, the entire setup here only totals 6 pounds. So if, like me, you thought it would weigh more, we were both wrong. It can now go back in for, hopefully, the last dry fit to triple check that nothing warped during welding, plus mark out where the sheet metal needs to be trimmed next, as all that extra tire clearance means nothing if we don't take care of this. It's been important to wait on the removal till now, as we've only just got our final surface to work towards, but the time has come to let the sparks fly. That has left somewhat of a sharp corner, but the original was pretty pointy too, so I guess I can live with it. Things are now back in for good. Seriously, about time. A whole series of clamps have been deployed to lock things down for welding, and the F-clamp is helping to bear the weight of the brake assembly. I'm very happy with how square the new firewall lies in relation to the chassis, which means we can't have screwed up too badly, and even the cuts on the sheet metal seem to have done the job. Both returns are parallel and level, and from both inside and out, things are looking good. Quick, weld it before something happens. So there you have it. We haven't finalized all the welds just yet, and the lower frame section has been left for some point later, as we're going to have to feed in some captive nut plates for body mounts first. Even so, I'm thrilled with how this has turned out. Remember how close the tire came before? Yeah, that alone was worth it. The design is pretty similar to the door bars used in NASCAR, so even without further triangulation, honestly, I think it's going to work just fine. It's been way more work than I was expecting though, which seems to be a theme on this channel, but I really did think this time would be different. Regardless, progress has been made, the results are to my satisfaction, and we even have a new tool to round things off. So after 2 months of work, let's call it there. Stay tuned for next time as we push forward. Thanks for watching. And a very special thanks to the amazing patrons, supers, donators, and subscribers who all help support our shenanigans. If you're interested in helping out, there are links in the description below. Until next time, keep building. We'll catch you later.